Hello everyone, welcome back once again. This is a Module 8 in our course on second language acquisition and learning, part of the Southeast European University's Masters in English Language Teaching. This module will be dealing with looking at more what happens inside the classroom in regards to language acquisition. So the title of the module is Observing Instructed Second Language Acquisition. This is a fairly short presentation. We won't go into a lot of depth. It will summarize a bit of what happened in the reading, and I think I'll draw some of what I think are the more important things that you need to consider as we deal with the material and move forward. In this presentation, we'll be looking, first of all, at, very quickly at natural versus instructional settings. In other words, where the learning is taking place, the second language learning, teaching and learning is taking place, whether it's in the classroom or outside, and the way that the following aspects of teacher-student interaction are handled in the classroom, specifically looking at mistakes or errors and the feedback the learners receive on the mistakes that they make, the types of questions that teachers ask, and the reasons for asking those questions, and whether or not they're useful or not. And associated with the above too, with errors and questions, is the concept of negotiation of meaning. Negotiation of meaning is something I think it's misunderstood often by students, but the idea is it sounds like a very formal thing, but it's not a very complicated concept. Basically, negotiation of meaning is to do with communication and its aspects of trying to understand what somebody is saying and then asking for information in order to better understand, to better explain, to better get the point across, and to receive the information. So it's to do with messages and messages and receivers, and the things that happen between people when they try to convey messages, when they try to communicate. So this has to do a lot with feedback. It has a lot to do with questioning. So we'll mention negotiation meaning with the other two. But just to say once again, negotiation meaning is something that happens in everyday life. It's not something which is just happening in the classroom, but it's a very important concept. And now, how these aspects relate to these two words, intake and uptake. You may remember from both the methodology and earlier this semester in second language acquisition, we talked about intake and uptake. And basically these two terms relate to, first of all, what the learner takes in other words, what the learner hears, somehow receives the message that they received, and then what is taken up. In other words, what is learned, what is remembered from that message. So if obviously we all have the experience of hearing something and understanding what we've heard, but then forgetting it. And as you know, learning is very much like that. It's one thing as teachers to first of all get students to be able to take in what we want them to take in. It's something else to get them actually to remember it, to learn it. So these two are very important. It's not just what learners actually receive, it's what they get, but how much they take with them after they've received that. Now, the setting, why is it so important? Why do we bother talking about the setting? And so specifically we'll look at what the advantages and disadvantages of learning language learning outside the classroom. So if you consider in the reading you have for this week, you have to complete a table, the different features of learning inside or in a naturalistic setting outside the classroom, or an instructional setting inside the classroom, and then what type of instructional setting inside the classroom. And as I said at the beginning, I don't want to go into too much detail here. I just want to bring up the main points of the reading and why they're relevant. So obviously learning outside a classroom is a much more, we call it naturalistic, and it's more, as you might think a first language learner would learn. However, children would learn language, their first language. But as we know, as adults, we bring with us the knowledge of a language, the knowledge of the world, and different circumstances as well. Obviously, an adult who's working, who's under pressure to learn and to survive and has concerns such as family and housing and that sort of thing, is a concern that a child would hopefully should not have, and in most cases does not. Most normal cases does not. They have a different kind of pressure, but as well as they bring the knowledge to bear, the knowledge of the world and the cognitive development, plus the knowledge of a first language, and perhaps the knowledge of the experience of having learned other languages. So what are the advantages and disadvantages inside the classroom? Now, of course, we know that outside the classroom might be more naturalistic, but are there advantages to being in a classroom? Obviously, there's a focus in the classroom. There's a teacher in the classroom, so that person's job, if they do their job well, should be to teach, to put you in a position as a learner to learn. And things should be arranged. There should be a syllabus, etc., a curriculum and a syllabus, and activities which relate to that syllabus and relate to that curriculum. And there should be goals within that curriculum, whether it's to pass an exam or to achieve some level of proficiency. So there's a structured environment in the classroom which is useful. But of course there may be some advantages outside the classroom to more naturalistic settings. And then specifically inside the classroom, what kind of structure works best? Is it better to have something which is more focused on form or more focused on fluency? And is it in a larger setting with more students, or a smaller setting with fewer students, or one-to-one even? Which works the best? And can we combine, this is an important question, I think, can we combine the advantages of a naturalistic setting with those of a structured one? Now, the reason I've put that here is for the simple reason that we've tried to do this very much, I think, in the days from audiolingualism, and now the more, you remember from methodology, some of the methods which try to recreate first language learning conditions, for example, total physical response, TPR, the silent way, which sort of tap into our natural learning ability and try to make a situation which is low stress or more almost directly like the first language learning experience, because this is seen to be more effective. And communicative language teaching has been dominated by this idea. At the same time, it also has a great deal of structure. And I think it's something we find ourselves caught a little bit as teachers. I know in my own experience, early in my career, I was told, I got a job once in a community college in North Carolina, and I was told not to teach grammar, not to teach the students grammar. And it struck me as strange. At the time, I had, I think, 4 or 5 years of teaching experience, most of it outside the United States, and in places where grammar was taken for granted that you would teach grammar. And I knew that there was a reason not to do that, and that language should be more communicative and everything else. But I was struck by this dictate not to teach grammar, and I listened to it, and because I obviously wanted the job and didn't want to upset my director from day one, I agreed. He says, yes, of course, I won't explicitly teach grammar. But then I went into the classroom and I looked at the students, and they all wanted to learn grammar. So of course I taught grammar, and then all the other teachers taught grammar. And it was something which the students expected us to do. We had to focus on grammar, explicitly on grammar. But that wasn't the main focus. The main focus was on communication. But we needed a balance. And so there's an element where you have to consider where the students are coming from, what they expect, what they need to do the language, what their learning experience has been, and what you can do to motivate them to learn. At the same time, we know that just studying forms is not going to enable them necessarily to be able to use those forms. We need to try to put them into more communicative settings, more communicative type of activities, but we need to have a balance. So, again, and we'll come back again and again, the importance of context. So, as you know from the reading, they're observing classes, they're seeing what's happening in different types of classroom, and what I've tried to do is to extract some of the I think the most important points. And so I've written down, first of all, focus on form or meaning. As teachers, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I'm telling you what I think is very important. And this is proven by research as well. It's also proven by common sense. But you need to focus on form or on meaning. Obviously we do both. But it's important to understand that at certain times in the classroom, there is a focus on form. That what we're looking at is whether we've used the correct word, whether it's been pronounced correctly, whether the inflection is correct, whether the grammar is correct. Everything is correct. That's the form. And is the meaning conveyed? Obviously, meaning is important, but we can't forget the form for the sake of just meaning. At the same time, we have to have some meaning, otherwise the form is an empty structure. without any real intention. Language is for communication, and meaning is communication. Accuracy or fluency, very similarly. We spend a lot of time working on fluency, and also a lot of time working on accuracy, and we need to have a balance. And I think it's very important as teachers to know that, for our students to know, and also for us to know, when we're focused on accuracy and when we're focused on fluency. Because if we want our students to be fluent, the idea is we don't want to keep interrupting them. But if we want them to speak accurately, we have to interrupt sometimes. We have to focus on the form. And some of the most successful teachers that I've dealt with have been able to distinguish when they're focusing on accuracy and when they're focusing on fluency, and the students are aware of that. And I know the teachers listen to their mistakes, they're making note of their mistakes, and they will come around to correcting them. At the same time, they know the teacher is interested in what they have to say and is encouraging them to express themselves. So I think it's important to know that we have both of these, but there is a balance. And again, similarly, are we focusing on learning the language? The use, there's two terms, use and usage, or learning to communicate in the language, the usage of the language. Use refers again to the grammar, the usage is, and vocabulary. Usage is how we use it in communication. So focusing on these two things and knowing when you're focusing on one and when you're focusing on the other, and achieving some kind of balance there. And I think an important point which many people neglect is how realistic is the goal of natural communication inside a classroom. Obviously, we do things like role plays, or have communicative activities where we try to mimic somehow or set up a situation which is natural. It may take place outside the classroom. The most obvious way is when we have a situation, for example, buying a bus ticket, a plane ticket, or asking directions, giving directions, pretending something where you're not in the classroom at all, and creating a situation as in a role play. This is very artificial, obviously, because it is as artificial as acting, but even more so, I suppose. But it does serve a purpose. I think that people make a mistake when they think that a classroom can be completely natural. It is by nature not a natural situation. Now I haven't put the triangle, our famous triangle up here with the teacher, the students, and the material, but I might at this point, because in a classroom you have a teacher and you have students, and the students come with experience, with expectations, and the teachers have experience and expectations. The students have a job to do, and the teacher has a job to do, and that is not a very natural relationship. I think all of you are teachers, or will be teachers, and you probably all have some teaching experience, and you probably realize that your perception of a teacher, at least I know from my own experience, and I know for other people as well, that as a student, my perception of a teacher was different than what actually the teacher was feeling. And I found this out when I started to teach. And then especially when I went back to study, and I looked at my teachers in a different way, because they were people too. And especially as a child, and as a student in school, and high school, and even into university, I looked at them as people who really knew their stuff, and I never thought about them not being prepared. And I remember my first experience of going to a class and realizing the teacher had not prepared the lesson. And I knew this after I taught, and I had been in that situation myself of not having time to prepare, and being a little bit uncomfortable, not being so organized, and being stuck that way. And as a student, I never saw that until I became a teacher. Then I went back and I saw teachers are people too. But the role relationship in the classroom is not a typical role relationship outside the classroom. And communication, as much as we try to make it as much as natural and as spontaneous and as meaningful being a very important word as possible, it isn't really natural. It's not a natural setting. But then again, maybe this is the whole point of natural. Perhaps the classroom is one natural setting, and that is a very valid point when you consider that we spend so much of our lives, how many thousands of hours, I'm not sure, but so much of our lives in the classroom as students, especially to the age of 18. And if you think about that for a moment, think how many hours, there's probably, except for sleeping, there's probably not anything else you do as a child as much as you spend as a student in the class. So it has an impact, and it is a natural environment, though it does have certain rules. Now, specifically, we're looking at feedback, and also we're going to look at question types now. What do teachers do, and how much does it lead to intake and uptake? Again, important questions. How important is the context on the effectiveness of the correction technique, and which are the most common, and which ones work the best? Which types of corrective feedback work the best? You'll know from the reading that these were all discussed. These are the types that were researched. You have explicit correction, where the teacher says directly, there's a mistake, and what you said, fix it, or here's how you fix it. Recast, which you remember from first language acquisition, when the teacher repeats what the student has said correctly, and hope the student picks up on it. Clarification request, these can be very simple. Teachers could ask the student simply to repeat what they've said, or ask them in a way which shows that there is a mistake in what they said, and even in a way that helps to point to what that mistake is. You can give metalinguistic feedback. You can say you've used the incorrect form of the verb, and the student says, okay, well, yes, I should use the different form of the verb. So it's the idea they're talking about the language. Elicitation, and which is asking again sort of questions to get the students to lead to the right answer, and repetition. Now, which of these works the best? We know from the research, you'll know that recasts are very, very common, as they are with first language acquisition, but they're not terribly effective, depending on the context. In some contexts they are. If the learners themselves are aware that the teacher is doing this, there's a better chance that they're going to pick up on it, but not necessarily. We generally focus on meaning, and when somebody repeats something to us, we don't necessarily hear the correction, just as children do. So I think it's important for us as teachers to know that when we use a type of feedback, whether or not the students are picking up on that feedback. Nothing wrong with recast, but the students have to be able to know that we're recasting, we're reformulating what they've said in the correct way in order for them to hear it correctly. Okay, we can't just assume they're going to pick up on it, and the research shows that. However, clarification requests and metalinguistic feedback are also popular, and they're much more effective. Elicitation is also very effective. Okay, repetition, probably the least. And they result in more intake and also more uptake. Now, question types and wait time. This is the last thing we're going to mention. The two types of questions we talk about in the reading are, generally there are two types of questions in a language classroom. One is a display, and one is genuine. And a display question is one where the teacher asks the student a question in order to display their knowledge. And a simple display question could be, what's the past tense of go? And the student says went. Another type of display question might be, what color are your shoes? Or are you wearing shoes? And the student replies, yes, my shoes are black, or yes, I'm wearing shoes. Now, are they genuine questions? In the classroom setting, they are genuine questions. Outside the classroom, they sound a bit silly. You can't imagine you having a conversation with several people and asking one person what color his shoes are. You sound like an idiot. You sound at least very silly, like you're making some kind of joke. In the classroom, nobody laughs at that question because it's expected. So in fact, in the classroom, it is a genuine question, but it is a display question. It's not asking the learner something that for information about. It's not very personalized. It's not meaningful in the sense, except in the sense that it displays knowledge and checks knowledge and displays it. So there are people who think you shouldn't ask so many display questions because they're not genuine in the classroom setting. However, as I've been trying to suggest to you, that doesn't mean that there's not a place for them, just because they're not genuine. And indeed, in the classroom setting, they do have some legitimacy. They are genuine in that setting. And that setting is, by nature, artificial. It's not completely natural. So we need to remember that. At the same time, I think it's very important, and I think you all agree, that people tend to be more motivated by things which are meaningful to them. And a teacher who asks a student about themselves, who seems interested in what the student has to say, or has activities which allow students to talk about what's interesting to them are more likely to result in learning, intake and uptake. So genuine questions have a place, as do more open-ended questions. We have closed and open-ended questions. The question of what color your shoes are is very closed, isn't it? Or do you like pizza? Yes, no. That's not very open-ended. That's a closed question. You have a simple answer, and there's a limit to that kind of question. As is a limit to the question, do you understand? Where the student can say, yes, I understand. A more open-ended question would be to ask, can you explain what I just said? Or can you add something to what I just said? So that gives the student a chance to expand. Just as asking a student what their favorite kind of food is more open-ended than asking, do they like pizza? So when we ask questions as teachers, we need to try to ask as many open-ended questions as possible. Obviously, closed questions are very useful, and the combination of the two is also very useful. In the reading, it talked about scaffolding, building. So it's nothing wrong with talking with a few closed questions to get students warmed up, to get them focused on the area where you want to focus, to orient them. But open-ended questions should have a place, or else it's going to be kind of flat and boring and not very motivating. Now, as important as it is to ask questions, it's also important to give students time to respond to those questions. And this research proves this. And the question is, how long do teachers give their students to respond to questions? What is the wait time? There has been a lot of research done on this, and the results always come back. And I know I've done my own research, and you can do your own research as well. You can time yourself for nothing else, so you can time somebody else. You can even have somebody come and time you. And in my experience, teachers are always surprised with how little time they give their students to respond. I think it's quite natural for us to want to fill the time, not to have moments of silence. Just as a student is uncomfortable when there's silence, teachers are also uncomfortable with silence. And I think teachers also feel like if they leave too much dead air, ask a question, wait too long, they'll lose the attention of the students and the control of the classroom. There may be some truth to this. At the same time, I don't know how many teachers I've observed who give their students not a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds to answer, which is unreasonable because it does take them time perhaps to think. And I know in other teacher training courses I've tried, and I tried for myself as well, to give at least 3 seconds, maybe 5 seconds. And if you count them out, if you ask a question and really count out 1, 2, 3, and then see where the student is, then it gives the student really time to respond, time to think, takes the pressure off a bit, and you don't lose control. I think teachers lose more control when they don't give students enough time, because the students become confused, they become distracted, and they give up. And then the teacher has to speak more and more and more in order to maintain that control. So, wait time is very important. Pay attention to it. That's all for this module. And in fact, that's the last module for this semester, the last presentation. The next module will be to do with the final exam. And there'll be no spoken presentation for that, though of course we'll be in touch with different question types, with topics that will be on the exam. Until then, have a great week, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye for now.